First of all, we have Roger Donald and Kevin White. Now, Roger is from NHS Direct, but apparently we met in another life when he worked for another company. And Kevin is from Nile, up in Scotland. And they're going to talk to us about self-service healthcare.
Thank you. In 1645, Prince Rupert's mercenaries smashed Cromwell's left flank at Naseby. In 1871, the Franco-Prussian War ground to a halt at the Siege of Metz. And in 1903, from the Carls of Bute came the first reports of sporran rash. And none of that has got anything to do with what I'm going to talk to you about today, but does show you how your wine wonders when you're worried. Thanks to Les Dawson for that one. Brilliant. Anyway, I'm Roger Donald, the one from the NHS with the tie from Whitehall, all those places you may have been able to tell. And my job is as Associate Director for Multi-Channel at NHS Direct, which means I'm responsible for all of our public-facing digital services. This chap is a guy called Tim Kelsey. He has just been appointed as the National Director for Patients and Information in the NHS. He's a journalist by trade. And historically, he's very interested in what patients think of our National Health Service. And his challenge to us is to build a National Health Service that is very responsive to everyone that uses it. And in everyone that uses it, I mean not just all of you, but anybody in England who is a visitor as well. So, quite a significant challenge, I think you probably agree. And there's one basic issue that we struggle with at NHS Direct, is that people use the NHS ineffectively. They turn up at A&E with a cost, as you can see up there, or they phone for an ambulance when they could have used a lesser point of care in the NHS to satisfy their particular need or requirements. And that's really kind of why I joined NHS Direct 4 or 5 years ago now, I forget, it's been a while, to try and do some good, for some public good, move away from that corporate kind of commercial profit-making world, and help bring some of my knowledge and experience of working with the guys at Nile over a number of years, and help provide digital services that met the kind of user needs that are out there. And the way that we try to do that is by creating things called health and symptom checkers. These are online and mobile smartphone app kind of tools that will take you through a health assessment. We cover about 41 different topics. We've got some sleeping topics that I hope never come to life, which is kind of things like nuclear and biological alerts and all that kind of stuff. The health and symptom checkers cover about 210 different clinical algorithms and are the safest way of us kind of taking you through a triage to see whether or not the fact that you think you're going to die is true or not, and lesser kind of things as well. The symptom checkers work by trying to sort you to one of these safe outcomes. And on the right hand side you've got some of the most expensive kind of NHS care points, and down on the left hand side you've got the less expensive care points. So as you can see from the couple of slides previously, calling an ambulance when you don't need one's quite expensive. Using a health and symptom checker for a few pence at a time is a much better way of providing you with the reassurance that you'll need to take the right step. And we try and do this over a number of delivery channels. We started off on the web, and then we were going to go iPhone app. But I said that was a bad idea and that we needed to be more inclusive, so we started off with mobile web, then we did the iPhone app to please my chief executive, and now we have an Android app, and kind of we will be developing more and more for more and more platforms over time. But some of the things that kind of spring to mind are developing for games machines. A lot of people accessing the internet through games machines these days, as well as providing kind of services through digital television and other kind of digital kind of products from smartphones, etc. And why should we do it? Well, you can probably see from this graph that in 2009-10, when we launched the digital service, straight away 5 million people came along and said, yes, I'd like to, I've got a need for this, I want to assess myself online. And what hopefully you can interestingly see is that there's just been a gradual decline in people using our telephone service, which is in the blue, and we seem to be tapping into new markets year on year as we release services in different kind of, or via different channels. So this sort of poses the question of, should we be developing health and symptom checkers and products like that for the channels just because they're there? Is it because the users are there? So one of the questions at the moment is, should we be providing health assessments over Twitter? Because lots of people come onto our Twitter account and ask us if they're ill and kind of whether or not we can help them in 140 characters. I think the best one was a picture of a young lady's chest covered, but just half of her chest, asking if it was the effects of ketamine had caused this rash on a Saturday morning. But you'll see some of that played out in our personas. So I think that kind of alludes to the fact that our service is inclusive. It's for everyone, no matter what you're doing. And this is kind of part of the story that I wanted to, or Kevin and I would like to take you on today is we've got some key challenges in terms of user experience and user-centered design when it comes to distressed health transactions, because people are naturally worried about their symptoms and the things that are either happening to them or happening to people that they care the most about, children, parents, etc. And we need to find a way of satisfying their needs for all the channels that we deliver our services through. We started doing some work last year with Professor Hugh Wilson, and his statement here is kind of talking about omni-channel and the fact that there are different channels that you can use, and obviously digital is one of those and the one that I'm most interested in, but it's the fact that we need to join up these channels so that as you use one of them and then move on to the next and then the next, that the NHS has a way of remembering you as you move from one of those to the next and the next. And people have suggested things like electronic health records that maybe you look after and you bring along and you plug in to our services and choose the information that you share with us so that we can make the best possible assessment of your signs and symptoms and therefore provide you with the most appropriate advice. As we saw a few years ago when we tried, when an electronic record was mentioned, there was outrage that Big Brother was looking to control all of your life. But from my perspective, working in the health sector, it's just safer for me to know more, not me, because I'm not a clinician, but for our clinical team that kind of I work with to build these products and tools to know more about you. Because the more we know, the better advice we can give. So, in a kind of visionary kind of way, we see a kind of a time when citizens are going online, obviously, kind of looking for health advice and kind of an information. And if you've got some sort of problem with your ear, then wouldn't it be great to have kind of a quick webcam consultation with a nurse over your Wi-Fi when you're sat at home or at work, so that you could have a quick assessment of whether or not it was something that needed you to go down to A&E or to your GP surgery, or whether you could actually just get yourself down to the local pharmacy with a prescription that's already been dealt out to you online by a clinician who's trained to do so, so that you can go back home and treat your illness yourself safely. Or in another kind of case, lots of people out there with concerns over young children, especially late at night when other primary care services are shut, like Christmas, bank holidays, when you can't get the advice and help that you need. Again, you can go online, you can start going through our assessments. You can get to a point in the assessment where it thinks that you do need to book an appointment, and so we start looking at directories of services, things that are open near you that you can get to, taking into account whether or not you've got a car, whether or not you're going to be walking, whether or not you're going to have to get in a taxi, and then offering you an appointment so that you can book in to that service there and then, knowing that you've got a slot, and you're not just going to turn up at your GP's and he's going to tell you, he or she will tell you to go away, come back in a couple of weeks because we're quite busy. And then obviously you get your appointment and hopefully we nurse you back to health. There you go.
Swap. Okay, my name's Kevin White, I'm from Nile. We're an experience and service design agency based in Edinburgh. We've been working with NHS Direct for 3-4 years in various different ways. And we've done lots of bits and bobs. I'm not necessarily going to talk in depth about the bits and bobs that we've done. We have created personas, which we are actually in the process of reviewing and validating and touching on and so forth. But these cover off the sort of people that are interacting with the services, the benefits that they get, what they want, all these sorts of things. We've done IA development and testing, we've done prototypes, done lots and lots of bits and bobs. What I wanted to talk about was really the sorts of interactions, the sorts of behaviour, the sorts of things that you want to be able to do for people and that people are finding important. And a lot of this is really basic stuff, but there is an importance to it. And the importance is that we have to provide safe, evidence-based clinical content. That's paramount. But in order to do that, you have to ensure that people are actually engaging with it properly. They have to read it. If they don't read it, then you've got a question as to whether or not this is clinically safe. If you're designing an interface where you know that somebody has to read this and give you a true and sensible answer, and they're not, then there's a question as to whether or not what you're providing is safe. So, we know users don't read stuff. Simple as that. They don't. They go up there, you stick in your lovely crafted content there, and they ignore it. And they go off and they try and interact with it, they try and work it, and then they phone you up and tell you it doesn't work. When you go, well, did you read that? No, I didn't read anything.
Which is the exact opposite of the way clinicians work. For any of you that have ever worked with clinicians, who will come armed with bucket loads of theses and reasons why this is safe.
Yeah, that's a little bit of a challenge, and it kind of points back to one of the questions I had earlier regarding the FSA. And the FSA believe that large amounts of content makes your financial transactions safer. Yeah, tick, carry on, whatever. So users are going to misread this stuff, they're going to misunderstand it. You've got a wide variety of educational levels, a wide variety of disabilities potentially, and a wide variety of languages. NHS Direct does not just provide service to English people, they provide service to anybody that is currently in England, whether or not they're from Abu Dhabi or Brisbane or Tokyo. So, coming down to the content, you've got, as Roger was alluding to there, a lot of clinical content, which is clinicians just going, right, this is everything you need to know about hay fever or diarrhea and vomiting or whatever. And you end up with a 5-page spread that's got absolutely everything you need to know about that. But in actual fact, you only want one bit of that information that's relevant to you because you're not pregnant, because you're not over 50, because you're not under 5, because you're not female, because you're not X, Y, Z. So you start to think, well, why don't we just ask questions that kind of narrow down that sort of stuff? And that's the sort of thing that we're doing. It's looking at asking questions so we can target the data that we're providing. We also found that a lot of people want to know why. So you get to an end and they go, well, Okay, you've told me that. Why? Why is this important? So we're trying to pull that out into the content as well and ensure that people are it's quite clear to them why. The other thing we also found was that we get to an end point where people go, well, just wait and see. You'll be fine, wait and see. So they want to know why, but they also want to know what else can I do. They don't just want to be told, wait and see, go away, because they feel like that they're being dismissed to a certain extent. So this idea of providing sort of additional little bits of advice on how to care for yourself, that's actually quite useful, and it provides a good touch point. And it also kind of gives you an opportunity to provide those questions where you go, if this happens, start doing a little bit more. Just watch out for this. So it's a little bit of education.
That kind of moves away from the traditional nursing school of thought as nurse knows best. I think it's the best way I've heard it described to me, which is I'm telling you to do this because it's for your own good, and therefore off you go and you should do it. Bye. And obviously we run a telephone health advice service where you can pick up on cues from patients where they're kind of umming and ahhing back on the telephone, where letting you know that they're not quite comfortable with the advice that you're giving them, and none of those cues are available to us through these digital channels.
Okay, another pretty basic point is if you want to exclude certain things, or if you want to find out about certain things, you can't just put it in the content. You have to put an interaction in some respect. Because if you put an interaction, somebody will think about it before they press the button. Well, mostly. If there's a limitation, try and bring that out and make it programmed. So most of the health and symptom checkers, I think all of the health and symptom checkers are for, they're not for sort of young children. So ask, well, who you come and talk to us about? What's their date of birth, or how old are they? Well, they're 6 months old. Really, you need to phone us. Or really, you need to go to your GP. You just basically stop the journey, tell them why, direct them to the right place. You're providing that. Don't just tell them this isn't for 6 months old, because people will just carry on through regardless, and then they'll get the advice at the end of the day and they'll think that's fine, I can do that for a 6 month old. And they can't. It's not clinically safe. So you have to start putting interaction points. And this is an example of big long question where there's suggestion that we actually, rather than ask, just kind of say, do you have any of these? Blah, 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 blah. Make them interactive points, and you're starting people, they've got to think about it. They've got to go, do I? Yeah. We've actually raised a mistake here. We should have none of the above. Because if you've got none of the above, you're absolutely certain that they've made a conscious choice to select none of them, rather than just ignoring them and carrying on. Okay, so that's one side of things. Another side of work that we did was looking at patient decision aids. Now, the idea behind these is that there are a lot of healthcare choices that you will have to make as you grow older, and yes, that will happen to you, and your physical form deteriorates. These choices range in severity and importance, but they're there. We will all deteriorate, and we will all need some form of healthcare intervention at some point. Now, there's a big move around about informed decision making within the NHS. You are given the ownership of your healthcare. You are the ones that make those decisions. You make informed decisions. But with the best will in the world, often the informed decision involves going along to a doctor, listening to a lot of information that you don't quite understand, and then going, yeah, okay, I'll do that. Or no, I'm not sure. There is the opportunity with the web to kind of create tools that allow people to engage with these decisions in a very different way. We did a lot of work looking at prototypes of this, and we looked at osteoarthritis of the hip in this particular case and worked with participants who had been diagnosed with osteoarthritis of the hip, and they were at various stages of their clinical progression through the choice that they had to make. And a number of things pop up. Generally, these are high stress conditions. Kidney failures, osteoarthritis with implications on your long-term mobility, cataracts, with the obvious fear associated with losing your sight. Various different things. So people are in a very, very anxious and stressed state. You want to make things simple, easy, calm. The other side of things is a lot of these interventions are potentially high risk. Osteoarthritis of the hip, whilst it has become a common surgical intervention to provide false hips, any surgical intervention comes with risks. And there needs to be a clear message about what those risks are in an understandable form. You're not necessarily dealing with medical statisticians, so you need to be able to describe that in an understandable form. And again, this comes down to simplifying the language, making it easy to engage with, and reassuring people. And reassuring I'll come back to in a bit. The other thing we found was things like visualizations and supporting diagrams. These help, again, with the sort of audience type that you've got, potentially elderly, who have a wide stream of difficulties with engaging with internet technologies. You're also potentially dealing with people who don't have English as a first language, low education. All of these things kind of go, make some visualizations and help people by providing some diagrams of it. Even simple stuff like, this is what your hip looks like. This is what we're going to do to it, in a nice, non-bloody form, is usually a good thing. The other thing that people were looking for, and again this probably points to the reassurances as well, is the real life stories. This was, they wanted to understand other people's experiences. They didn't want it from a clinician. They wanted somebody who had gone through this to tell them it was going to be fine. It was difficult at times, it was hard, but at the end of the day this happened. Or this was where what their life story was and how their experience was. But it allowed them an opportunity to connect with them. And that gives you back to, or brings you back to kind of personas and opening up that. And for patient decision aids, you would need kind of very, very specific personas because they are very, very specific conditions. So, but that all kind of ties in. An analogy that I was thinking of was the kind of calming messages that you're aiming for in emergency situations. Plane crashes, you want to know what to do. So you have these messages drilled into you in a calm voice, in a consistent voice. Every time you go on a plane, you've got nice visual representations of the cards, very, very few words, so you can kind of quickly access it. And there are accessibility problems if you can't see that, but again, this is all about just trying to create an engagement that keeps you calm. When I do first aid courses, I remember years ago, one of the guys that taught me how to do first aid, when he was telling me how to do CPR and all this stuff, he was in a calm voice and he explained, if I tell you in a calm voice, when you have to do this for real, you'll be calm. I wasn't, but he told me that. Okay, so that's kind of some of the areas that were looked at and so forth, but really, what do people actually want? Now this is, I have no idea, I have no TV. This is Dr. Christian. Yeah. NHS Direct did a collaboration with Embarrassing Bodies, and it was really about trying to engage, I think in that particular instance, engaging a difficult audience, teenagers, and with the difficulties that they face. They're notoriously rubbish at going to GPs and stuff like that, but it kind of opened it up. It made it something that they could engage with and work with. And that working with popular media is a good thing. It opens up these ideas, it makes them, they're not hidden away or anything like that. Is that what people want? Yeah, some people will. There's a lot within that video, the imagery, the social commentary, the looking at things and normalization of the whole process. That's all really, really important things. Just
what we did with the Embarrassing Bodies TV show was we got their celebrity doctors to put onto video the questions of our symptom checkers and just walk through it step by step. So you were navigating from one bit to the next. And we kind of thought it was a bit gimmicky at first when we first engaged with Maverick Television. But we thought, it's quite an interesting test. And actually what came out of it was some feedback from Australia where some colleagues were working in the outback with Aboriginal communities with low kind of literacy skills. And actually we could take video content and kind of use that out there in a remote place that's very far away from emergency care and help these communities to deal with the issues that they've got.
They weren't in England, so they weren't allowed. I'm joking. Right. So yeah, what do people want? We did a study just recently, which was really, it was a kind of broad study looking at the switch over to 111 and the sort of service that people were expecting and looking at. And one part of that was really this idea of self-service, the type of features that we wanted. There was loads of other stuff that we got out of it, but I just wanted to run through a couple of little points about this. So one of the questions we asked was, what sort of features would you find valuable? And we give a list of them, and then other things as well. These were the sort of things that were coming up. The response rate in this survey was about 1,500 people. It was put on NHS Choice's website as well as some paid respondents, so we got a huge amount of data to work with, which was great. But the sort of top things that people were coming out with that they wanted were text explaining how to deal with symptoms. This kind of touches on the idea of multi-channel. It's people are using their mobiles in a way that's kind of there, they engage with it, it's quick, it's short, and if they get a text explaining how to deal with the symptoms, I'm guessing that they might thinking that, well, it might be a short text and not 15 pages that I have to wade through. Tips from individual doctors or nurses in self-care, again coming back to that reassurance. They were looking for some type of authority figure to say, you're all right, this is what you want to do, this is how you want to go about it, you're fine. And one of the top ones was information on medicines, which would be effective, again, wanting that self-care, wanting to connect with it, wanting to be able to just kind of do something. So it's allowing them to help themselves and treat themselves. And that could be a desire to avoid having to go to the GP because they haven't got time. It could be a desire that they want a little bit more control over things. If their questions weren't answered, though, you've got nearly half of the people were going for a telephone callback. So they weren't going for other digital channels. They weren't going for, well, you got bits and bobs, web chat, email contact, live and webcam and audio chat. But they were really interested in connecting again with a person. And this was, one of the earlier slides talked about multi-channel and how multi-channel doesn't necessarily mean just replicating every experience on, or the experience in the same way on every channel. There are different reasons for going to different channels. And one of the takes that I have from this is that by coming to the telephone, they want to talk with a real person. They want a little bit more reassurance. One of the things we did explore a little bit further was live webcam and audio chat, and I've got a couple of bits and bobs later about that experience. Web chat, again, I've got a little bit of slide there, but again, that's something that people are kind of starting to engage with more, and I believe there was a pilot study done with some web chat which was relatively successful.
Web chat's been incredibly successful, not only with the public but also with the people that commission us to provide the services. So I know it's been around for ages and it kind of feels quite old hat probably, but you know, as soon as some fairly important people kind of involved in commissioning services on a national kind of or nationwide kind of saw it working in the way that the public engage with a trained nurse through just sort of typing, kind of they thought it was absolutely fantastic, and I was astonished that they'd never seen it before, but it was very good. Okay, so at the end of the day, this is people who are still unwell, and their actual inclination at that point is a sort of significant majority there, face-to-face consultation. I want to talk to somebody directly. Weirdly though, there's a sort of significant minority who are looking for an online consultation. And we did ask another question about if you had the budgets of the NHS digital team, what would you do? And there was a sort of reasonable number of responses saying online consultation. And that might be something that is possible. More on that. But again, face-to-face consultation, phone consultation, action in emergency. And if we bring that back to the health economics argument about trying to save money and direct people towards the right channel, this is the sort of thing that we want to respond to. It's start off by providing that reassurance, ensuring that we're providing them what they want, to try and make sure that the people that do get through to here are the ones that really, really need it, rather than the ones that are just going, well, I've not got that, you've not answered all my questions, I'm just going to keep going until I get exactly what I want. It's trying to provide them exactly what they want at the start without having to go through the whole expensive process of giving them access to multiple different channels. Not to say that we should stop that, but... So, one of the things that Roger mentioned at the start was really taking an opportunity at this point to highlight challenges and questions that we've got
for you. Because we don't know all the answers to a lot of these things, and we've had some significant challenges in how we approach testing in this area, and other bits and bobs. So first one, just coming back to the web chat stuff. You get to an endpoint, and that endpoint tells you you're going to have a 4-hour wait to talk to somebody. Now, what do you do then? How do you manage that process? And that could be a web chat or it could be a telephone call. There's a real need for us to actually be able to manage people's frustrations, manage people's anxiety. Because at this point, they've come to you because they've got a problem. Now, if that problem was associated with their child, their anxiety levels are going to be through the roof, mostly. So how do you kind of manage that expectations around about that in a world where everything is instant? And they expect, especially things like web chat. I mean, most tech companies now have web chat support services, and it's pretty good. It's pretty instant, and you kind of, that's what you start to build up an expectation of. So there's a need to kind of almost tone that down a little bit and provide them with reassurance and calming with the text, because in terms of in times of high load, there won't be a capacity to respond that quickly to everybody. And that's what it comes down to. How do you manage that sort of frustration level? Another one. Okay, I've got a question for y'all. Just to set the picture, you've got a bleeding nose for whatever reason. You're not quite sure. You've had it for maybe 5 minutes. So you think, oh, this is a topic. What am I going to do? So you go to NHS Direct and you answer a few questions and you get this. What do?
Panic.
Panic's good. Who would call 999? You can raise your hands. Seriously, nobody would call 999?
A few.
My God.
A few.
The problem's bigger than I thought. Okay. I think you're all sort of pointing to the problem that we've got here. Here's a quote. And I took this from when I was downloading the iPhone app. And seriously, compliance is a big, big problem. Now, that nosebleed 999 point, I'm not quite sure what the disposition is to get you to that. I can't remember exactly which questions I asked. It is a valid endpoint. Now, here's another scenario for you. I have indigestion. I go along and think, it's not clearing. And if you've had proper indigestion, chest pain kind of feels quite tight, and you feel quite tired. I go along, fill out a few forms. 999, because I'm having a heart attack. Heart attack can quite happily manifest or masquerade as indigestion, or vice versa. Now, I've gone in with an expectation that I'm not going to have anything serious to do. And yet, I get told I have to do something very, very serious. 10% of people will comply with that.
That's about right.
Now, that's what you lot did. Right, so you're having a heart attack, they're telling you to phone 999, and you ignore it. And people die.
No, nobody's died on our service.
Nobody's died in their service.
It's true.
True. People have bad times. And this is a big, big, big problem. So how do you get across the message any more bluntly? How do you encourage people? This is actually serious. If you've got a high endpoint, so you think, actually I am having a heart attack, I expect to be able to be told that I need to go to the hospital, only 70% of them actually phone 999 in that case. Are you mad? I mean, if you went to a doctor and the doctor said, no, I need to phone 999, you'd go, okay, yeah, fine. And it's not as if the NHS is an untrusted online brand. It's got high levels of trust, high levels of brand recognition. People trust this service, but they don't do it. How do you make it more obvious? That's a huge challenge for us.
By having it justified by
Sorry?
Reason.
Yeah.
Say call 999. Exactly. But why? Because
Yes.
you die.
Yep. Okay. My response to you. My response to you. Clinically, you don't necessarily want to distract people.
There's a payoff.
That's the kind of balancing act
that we have to. There's between clinical safety and user experience, and there's a trade-off in the middle. And historically, we're getting much better, but historically, that balance shifts towards clinical safety. It must be safe. Yeah. So the instruction, if we end up in court, which happens, and the clinician who is responsible for programming that algorithm has given you a message that says, you've been through this assessment, all your symptoms suggest that you need an ambulance, I've told you to phone an ambulance, and through some of the user experience work that we've done about delivering the message, it was about make it clean, make it concise, people don't read much, get it on there, etc. They're not going to get kind of sued. You've been given the correct advice, and so I accept what you're saying. There are A/B testing kind of methods to start now looking at how we can change it. But what we've been struggling with is getting our clinical team who have a wealth of expertise and knowledge gathered over hundreds of years, is getting them to help to come back down that kind of balancing scale a little bit, so that they play in user experience into the clinical safety.
What would a doctor say? The clinical team is comprised of
What would a doctor say?
Sorry.
He's not going to say, go to a hospital and then not speak to you. Remember the video that we saw on Google Check?
Yeah.
It's exactly that.
Absolutely.
And this is part of the journey that kind of we're talking about in taking kind of non-digital people through a service delivery that is about health, and getting to a decent outcome on limited budgets.
I don't know actually how you solve it, but obviously with my healthcare, generally I get kind of advice from a person, not like a website. I don't know who's behind the website. Was there an error in the algorithm? I went through a bunch of steps. I make websites so I know that it could be a mistake. Like, how do you get people's kind of confidence now that this is actually a real doctor who's programming this? That didn't come across in that stuff so far.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Is there also something about? So I'm interested. Do you want them to dial 999?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So because you're changing channel. So I'm using a computer. So I've now got to stop using a computer, pick up the phone. I mean, there are some really obvious things that you can do if you really want them to do it. So, for example, you can actually get it to immediately do it on the computer, because the computer can use VoIP so literally at that point.
We'll come to that next.
But that comes down to whether or not you really want that, because there's all sorts of problems that could come out the other end.
Sounds like this is a really, really good discussion. So can we just let the guys finish?
Yeah, no. Well, we're happy. Don't worry.
Okay, you're happy. Okay.
Yeah. Okay. So, speaking to that point, and I know you had some quick points earlier as well, Rolf, and we'll come back to that if that's okay. And I know you had a question. We'll come back to that as well. Another problem we had. So, we, as I say, we did a little study looking at online consultations. Now, when we did this study, we were conscious, or we were concerned that people technically might not be able to engage with it properly. We kind of wanted to see what the consultation was like. So we made sure we pre-screened, we made sure we primed, we made sure we got everybody set up. We made sure that they had the technology that was there. We weren't looking for specialists. We weren't looking for digitally savvy people. We're looking for common old garden people. But we kind of did do a little bit of work screening and making sure that they kind of knew what was the technology that was using. And we kind of didn't set up a big, massive platform or anything like that. We just used Skype. Skype's easy. You just press the button. Let me just show you a little video of one of the interactions.
Okay, it's now saying speaker can't assess your sound card, microphone seems to be working fine. webcam, I've got a tick saying that that's working
Okay.
fine, but you can't see me.
Don't worry. You can see me, can't you?
Can you see me?
That's it, I can see you now. That's better.
Hello.
Hello.
Sorry about that.
That's no problem. Well, I'm Jo, I'm one of the nurses. Now, I understand that you have a rash.
Yes. That's right, yes.
I'm really struggling to hear you.
Okay, so what we found was that they weren't set up for the technology. There was big difficulties engaging with them. There was problems with the way that they had set up. There was problems in getting them to function. There was even problems. We kind of had part of the survey that we did. We kind of explored a little bit about what sort of dispositions people might want to have an online consultation with. So you've got things like rashes and nosebleeds and stuff that's got a visual component to it. Maybe not ketamine rashes or anything like that, but even we had problems with that. So you had difficulty, the user's lighting. That caused problems because you couldn't see the rash, or the nurse practitioner wasn't able to see the rash. It just didn't function as safely as would be required to do, which is why we had a problem with this. The other problem that we've got is actually testing with people in distress. So the previous talk was about causing people distress. Now there are massive ethical problems with that, but we actually need to be testing with people in distress. We can test to our heart's content with people who are calm and relaxed and no problem, but we can't actually necessarily test with someone whose child is screaming in their ear, who's got a rash, they're not sure, they're panicking about meningitis, they're panicking about all manner of things. We can't test with people like that. We can't test with people who are in context. They've fallen over, they've crashed, they've done something where they feel that they need to kind of contact somebody. It's not emergency necessarily, but they want to maybe connect with somebody. So we tried this as part of the assessment. We again primed these people. We tried to kind of set them up. Now these, admittedly, they're not professionally trained actors, but they had been recruited because they had had a condition in the last 3-6 months, something like that. So they had experienced it recently. We told them prior to, right, we're going to be acting this out. The nurse practitioner will act it out. Can you act out in this manner? Just think back to how you were and how you responded to it. Oops, hang on. Come back.
Yes, hello.
Hello. Tanya, I'm Jo, I'm one of the nurses from NHS Direct. I can obviously see there that you've got a nosebleed.
Yes.
How long has your nose been bleeding for?
About 10 minutes.
Okay, and you're not trying to stop that bleed, I see.
No, I'm not.
So, and also into more serious conditions. Now, what we were looking at, have we got a few more minutes?
No.
Okay, I'll be quick about this one. So, alternative methodologies is what we need to look at. Things like ethnography studies. There was an ethnography study done by the Design Council just recently, which was looking at violence against NHS personnel in A&E departments. They went in there, they started looking at why it was happening, what was going on, what they could do to assault that. Can we look at these as opportunities for starting to understand the reassurances that people need in order to use these services properly? Theatre studies, you're actually using actors, don't bother with people. Mobile ethnography, trying to basically in some way connect with people as they are using these services. Co-creation opportunities, getting nurse practitioners, clinicians, members of the public, designers, UX people all in together, sort that all out. We can talk a little bit about the future, which will be very brief. We just pick this?
I think ultimately you can see some of the challenges that we face in trying to test a kind of, in a good kind of way, in a practical way, distressed, contextual, remote health services. It's difficult.
Okay.
Any advice, please come in.
I did have some questions, or your question slide, but they were rubbish. So I gave a takeaways question slide.
We'll leave the takeaways up. Thank you very much, guys. Jo just because I'm the bossy person in the room, we have had some questions, but who's got? We'll have two. Down the back.
I've got one about track. How many people when they get to the screen like the emergency then go back and answer questions?
Yes, we do.
So, just for those who can't hear it, do they track? Does NHS track the people who go to a certain screen and get a response and then go back and change their questions? Is that what you?
Yeah, just to give you a quick example. So I did that with my daughter, and I actually went back, and the thing that I tried then to understand was the definition of acting normally. By definition, it's an deal.
So we do track it. We've got a massive amount of data about the way that patients use the service. We look at kind of gaming theory and things like that as well, because in some instances people are trying to reach an outcome that they want. So it's a very complex thing.
One last question. No, excellent. Joe.
How much do you think your challenge is trying to get through, trying to do things in a safe manner versus kind of the organisational side of things?
Everything is about doing it in a safe manner, and that is the imperative. That is one of the principles that the service is developed under. So if it's not safe, it doesn't go live.
But do you think there are ways that you can, in some of the agile conversations, that you could find new ways of agilely testing and coming up with new ideas and getting things through the organisation while still being safe?
Absolutely, but it's about the definition of what is safe and what's acceptable. And so somebody was mentioning using a website to make a phone call. One of the things I have to deal with is what if that phone call drops? How do I contact you back on a number when possibly there isn't one because you're coming through a number of servers, etc.
Okay. Thank you so much, guys. I'm sure you'll be around for questions later. Thank you very much.